Let's start with some general opinions. What do you think of Intel's plan to acquire GlobalFoundries?
The Wall Street Journal indicated that Intel is looking at a $30 billion bid for GlobalFoundries and bringing it in-house. Intel has U.S. government co-funding to expand U.S. microprocessor manufacturing. And of course, some of GlobalFoundries plants are ex-AMD and ex-IBM plants, which are located here in the United States. And so this would be part of Intel's overall effort to bring onshore more advanced process technology and manufacturing to assure that in times of pandemic or in times of conflict, they can continue to build parts for a variety of purposes.
Do you think the governments would go against this deal?
Yeah, the issue here is GlobalFoundries is already an aggregator of fabs. So they aggregated the fabs from AMD, they aggregated the fabs from IBM, and of course they have their own capabilities that they've developed since. There may be an issue with regard to scale overseas, since this move was already not only blessed, but co-funded by the US government. They'll be all right with it. The question will be, will China or the EU raise red flags? My expectation is given this is backed by the US government, the EU will probably back off and let this go through. It doesn't create a significant problem for any of their companies, at least not at the moment. They're probably more focused at the ARM acquisition of NVIDIA at the moment anyway. China would be the wild card. If China could take exception to this, clearly because Intel is such an iconic US company, and we're talking about a significant amount of manufacturing capacity. But China has its own fab. It's not like they can't counter with capability, but that's where I would expect to be the naysayer. The government that's likely to push back on this is likely to be China, and they're going to probably want some concessions. The reason I think the EU may not raise a major complaint on this is that GlobalFoundries is in trouble. And what they don't want is they don't want a bunch of these large factory sites to fail and a lot of people become unemployed. Intel is capable of fixing GlobalFoundries, which would make that manufacturing capacity remain viable. And there's no real major concern about moving manufacturing capacity out of Europe to the US as there is to be less dependent on Asia. So the result is I think a deal can be cut politically. As I said, this thing is directly backed by the US government. And so the EU wouldn't be rolling against Intel, they'd be rolling against the US government. And that's something they typically don't do without a lot of thought. And they too may ask for concessions, but I don't think the concessions they'd ask for will be material holdups to this deal. I mean, more like they want more localized control. They'll want assurances that the labor contracts will be enforced. Those kinds of things which are common in mergers like this, and I don't think Intel will have a problem with agreeing to.
IBM is suing GlobalFoundries for breach of contract. Would this acquisition plan affect the case?
Actually, I think the other way around. I think the IBM lawsuit is what opened the door to this potential purchase. The lawsuit would have lowered GlobalFoundries' price, and Intel does have a reasonable partnership with IBM already for technology sharing, and had been in discussions with IBM in terms of manufacturing. So the end result would be that Intel could likely settle this lawsuit relatively quickly with IBM, and largely by rotating to be able to produce the parts that IBM needs to be produced. Intel's plants are some of the most advanced in the market. And so if IBM was able to make use of those, they could advance very well. Plus, Intel has also been struggling a bit with advanced process. And if they get access to the IBM 2 nanometer process, that would allow them to leapfrog their competitors. So part and parcel, this could result in a fairly significant bump for IBM, GlobalFoundries, and Intel if this plays out.
GlobalFoundries is expanding towards 14 nanometers and above. How would this strategy affect the foundry market all over the world?
It should expand it. It really kind of depends on the interest in Intel. With Intel buying the company and Intel's history of being relatively proprietary, there's going to be some concerns about, well, for instance, AMD may be concerned about using Intel as a fab partner, even if IBM isn't. The thing is Intel and AMD have partnered on major parts in the past, and those partnerships have actually worked out reasonably well. They've had their ups and downs, but they've also worked fairly closely with Pat Gelsinger after he left Intel. And I think they trust him a lot more than they trust any other Intel executive. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But if they can make this work, then there's plenty of upside. Even if they can't, though, the IBM deal and the United States backing of the overall effort should protect Intel from any significant downside.